And I'm gonna let folks in here. Wonderful, welcome. Seeing everybody streaming in. Hello, and welcome to tonight's event. We'll just give a second for folks to come in, but my name is Lee Pfeffer. I'm the Museum Operations Manager at the GLBT Historical Society, and I want to welcome everyone for our artists talk, celebrating 50 years of pride through art. I'm just going to give a little bit of housekeeping so that you know how to interact with Zoom. We will have a formal Q&A section near the end that you can send questions in via the text function. So if you select Q&A on the bottom of your screen, you can send in a question that all the panelists will be able to see. And we really encourage everyone to interact via the chat as well. Feel free to put in your own comments, your own reflections, chat amongst one another by using the chat function. We also have someone doing some live captions for us tonight. Thank you, Randall. So if you want to access that, you should have a little button that says show subtitle or show closed captions that you can view that. And if you're viewing on Facebook, there should be some auto-generated captions as well. And if you at any point during the Q&A section, if you are not able to or do not want to send a question in via text, you can select the raise hand function and we'll have the ability to unmute you and you can give your question verbally. And with that, I'm going to fade into the background and introduce Terry Beswick, our Executive Director.
Thank you so much, Lee. Thank you for putting together tonight's panel and for all the work that you do behind the curtain. I want to welcome everyone to tonight's event celebrating 50 years of pride through art, hosted by the Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, and Transgender Historical Society. And what I'd like to do is just introduce everyone briefly to the organization and to tonight's event, and then I'm going to turn it over to the moderator for tonight. And then I'm going to fade away with Lee and go and watch tonight's event on Facebook Live. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. Tonight's event is hosted by the GLBT Historical Society. We were founded in 1985. We're recognized internationally as a leader in the field of LGBTQ public history. Our mission is to collect, preserve, exhibit, and make accessible to the public materials and knowledge to support and promote understanding of LGBTQ history, culture, and arts in all their diversity. So we have two sites where we conduct our operations, the GLBT Historical Society Museum in the Castro and the John DeCecco Archives and Research Center in the Mid-Market neighborhood of San Francisco. Of course, they're both closed right now due to COVID. We hope to reopen them in mid-August. And in the meantime, I just want to encourage everyone to go to our Pride-centered website, which we have up and have been loading stuff onto all month. It includes some fabulous new exhibitions, archival resources, and events like this one. So just go to glbthistory.org and check it out while it's all up there in one place. And while you're there, please consider becoming a member of the GLBT Historical Society. We're running a special for the month of Pride. And until the end of June, you can get an annual membership for just $35, $20 low income. And you get for that, you get for the whole year, you get some cool perks. And you also get to know that you're being a part of helping to preserve and share our fabulous LGBTQ history. So with that, I want to move to tonight's event. We're here to celebrate 50 years of pride through art. Tonight, I'm delighted to introduce a longtime member of our chosen family here at the Society, Win Mixter. And Win is going to introduce the rest of tonight's wonderful panel, who are also, many of them are longtime associates of the GLBT Historical Society, part of our family, including Craig and Marke, of course, former member of our board and occasional DJ, Valentin Aguirre, who is chair of our board currently. And I don't know about the rest of you, I'm sure we've worked together on many things. So welcome everyone, I'm excited to hear from all of you tonight. Win Mixter is a San Francisco-based designer and illustrator, streetcar enthusiast, and longtime Historical Society volunteer. Tonight, Win will discuss how his research in the Historical Society archives provided inspiration for his artistic contribution to this year's San Francisco Arts Commission Art on Market Street program theme, celebrating 50 years of gay pride. Mixter's artwork recognizes 18 unique people, places, and protests from the pre-Stonewall era through the present in a series of black and white drawings. His intention is to recenter the narrative of our June Pride celebrations on the original principles of resistance and rebellion. And with that, I want to congratulate you all on this exciting contribution to the queer art and culture of San Francisco, and particularly to Win. And thank you for sharing your work with us here tonight.
Great.
Have a wonderful
Thank you so
event.
much, Terry.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. Just before we get started, I'm going to introduce Craig Corpora from the San Francisco Arts Commission to do a little bit of introduction to this year's Art on Market Street poster kiosk series. So Craig is the Program Associate in Public Art at the Arts Commission and the manager of the Art on Market Street kiosk poster program. So Craig, I'll give it to you, and then we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll introduce everyone else.
Great. So hello, everyone. I'm Craig Corpora. I'm the Program Associate in Public Art at the San Francisco Arts Commission. But first, I'd like to take a moment and thank the GLBT Historical Society for hosting this event, and to acknowledge that not only Win, but our next two artists for the series, Marcela Pardo Ariza and Justin Hall, have also used the Historical Society for their poster research. So our program and the public has truly benefited by having the Historical Society as a resource. So every year since 1992, the San Francisco Arts Commission has selected new work by artists for the Art on Market Street kiosk poster series. The program is a partnership between the Municipal Transportation Authority and Clear Channel, who donates the kiosk space. We commission 3 to 4 artists to create a new body of work that responds to a specific theme on San Francisco. Some past themes have been Sanctuary City, the Summer of Love, and Exposed, which was artists responding to the city's civic art collection. Each poster series is on view for about 3 months and are installed in 18 mini bus kiosks along Market Street, on the north and south side of Market Street, beginning at Stewart Street near the Embarcadero and ending at Hyde right in front of the Orpheum Theater. One special note to make is that our poster series is often artists' first foray into public art, and often then move on into larger site-specific installations for us. Some notable artists who have created posters for our program include Sofia Cordova, Anthony DeCenza, Jason Yeagle, Susan O'Malley, Rigo23, and Margaret Kilgallen. So just so you know, artists selected for this program are only required to create 6 posters, and that's it. For Pride as a Protest, Win designed 36 posters, conducted a ton of archival research, which he then included in a website he created, made a Google map, an Instagram account, wrote his own press release, and helped organize this public program. So I just wanted to thank Win for the tremendous amount of work he did for Pride as a Protest and for the rich and diverse queer historical document he created. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Craig. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. So hopefully this works. Can everyone see that? Yeah, I'm getting some nods. Okay. Great. Let's go ahead and begin then. Thank you so much for the introductions. I'm going to go ahead and introduce the other panelists in context with the parts that they're going to be speaking to. So I will reference them by name in my acknowledgement section, but just so you know, there's more information coming on each panelist. So Terry gave a little bit of this overview, but just to recap, my name is Win Mixter, and I'm honored to be sitting before you to present my vision for celebrating 50 years of gay pride. My project is called Pride as a Protest. I am a San Francisco-based illustrator, a longtime GLBT Historical Society volunteer. I am queer. Let's see, I'm also an amateur birder, a streetcar enthusiast, and I'm a big fan of Golden Gate Park. You can find me there bird watching a lot of the time. A few acknowledgements before we begin. There are so many people that have helped me throughout this project. I've been working on this for more than 14 months, and I couldn't have done it without everyone's support and input and, helping me refine my research and my list of subjects. So I won't read everyone by name, but just to call out a few, huge thank you to my #1 fans, my mom, Randall, who is actually typing the closed captions for this event tonight. My housemates, Lowell, Adam, and Luke, who have heard me talking about this incessantly for the last forever. Alex Fiallo, who actually sent me the brief for the project and inspired me to submit my work. Huge thank you to Low Maintenance Slots, my #1 group chat. As far as research is concerned, huge thank you to Isaac from the archives. Isaac's brainstorming and idea bouncing and resources really came in handy throughout the research process. And it was so fun to actually be in the archives for much of this project, since I normally volunteer just at the museum. And then thank you so much to my wonderful panel that's here tonight with me, Dorian, Tina, Marke, Alvin, and Craig. Also shout out to Lee for organizing the event. So let's get into it. Pride is a protest. I'll give you a quick agenda of what we're going to talk about tonight. We've got about 85 minutes scheduled. I hope I don't go longer, but just keep that in mind. It is Zoom, so if you step away from the computer, I won't know anyway. We're going to do a quick introduction and project overview. We will then go through each of the subject categories. So there are 9 people, 6 places, and 3 protests memorialized in the 18 drawings. I'll make some connections between the subjects, and then we have some conclusions and a call to action at the very end. So the origins of Pride. Pride began in San Francisco 50 years ago as a gay inn in Speedway Meadows and Golden Gate Park as a, quote, freakin' fag revolution in solidarity with the previous year's Stonewall riots. This is actually an original pamphlet, I believe, that I found in one of the old Pride Committee archive records for the original gay inn. The early iterations of Pride, probably from 1970 to about the mid-1990s, were more about displays of courage that it took to be gay in the face of a society that didn't understand it. The Protest of Bigots from 1977, which you see here as an early example. I also love this iconic Dan Nicoletta photo from 1989 that shows a disused cop car, shall we say, being repurposed as a float for Club Chaos and Klubsitute. And I think this photo by Drago Renteria, who is a photographer and one of the subjects of this project, is actually something that really sums it up really well. This isn't from this year, this is from 2017. So obviously trans people are always ahead of the curve. But this summarizes what Pride means. It means bash back. It means Black Lives Matter. It means Black trans lives matter. It means FTP. It means fire to the prisons. It means become ungovernable. So that's what Pride should be. The meaning of Pride today, not literally this year since celebrations have been canceled due to COVID, but Pride in the late 2010s has been all about rainbow capitalism, the notion that corporations should entice the queer community to spend their money with them responsibly because they were queer allies. It's really an absurd waste of money to tell the world that your company supports Pride and celebrates it when that time and those dollars could be given directly to populations in need and organizations around the world. Some especially egregious examples, in my opinion, Wells Fargo, they finance the DAP pipeline that's currently ravaging the Standing Rock Reservation in North Dakota. They also invest heavily in the private prison and prison industrial complex, which is being protested right now, literally, in the Compton's transgender district. Facebook, as we know, had a lot of early aggression towards drag queens and trans individuals who wanted to represent themselves with something other than their legal given name. They also sell our private data and refuse to take down fake news. Gilead, the pharmaceutical company behind PrEP, prices the drug at $1,500 to $2,000 a month, even though the cost of manufacturing a month's worth of PrEP doses only costs $6. So these are exactly the kind of people that should not be a part of Pride, in my opinion. This project aims to recenter the narrative of Pride away from pink washing and rainbow capitalism to its roots as a protest. The black and white color scheme is probably the most obvious example of this. It's visually alluring because it starkly frames the content. It highlights the relationship of the pieces together as a promenade down Market Street. And it also acts as a statement or a protest against the over-rainbowification of Pride. So the 18 front and back posters are intended to expose the public to people, places, and protests that have made San Francisco a global epicenter of queer life. In selecting the subjects for my series, I aim to represent the full spectrum of our queer community as much as possible, and also try to highlight as many lesser known narratives about various subcultures as possible. Obviously, it's almost impossible to incorporate everybody, but I'm hopeful that you find representation across the board. By centering on stories of resistance and radical self-expression, the project tries to recapture some of the brave and defiant ways in which queers have liberated themselves and demanded their own freedoms over the last 50+ years. At the advice of Paul Bromberg, who is a former ED of the Historical Society, I'm focusing on the many firsts that have occurred in San Francisco, from the first National Deaf, Gay, and Lesbian Center, the first openly gay man to run for public office, Jose Sarria, to the world's first queer theater company. We've known this all along, that no one is coming to save us. We have to save ourselves, and we have to take our collective freedom into our own hands. The project aims to recenter the narrative of Pride back to resistance, rebellion, and radical self-expression. Our queer spaces have long been spaces of resistance, rejecting the status quo and carving out community for ourselves in the fabric of mainstream society. Pride itself is a rebellion, a rejection of the laws and social norms imposed on us so that we may express our true selves and find happiness. And radical self-expression means expressing ourselves in whatever larger than life and creative ways we see ourselves truly. So with that, let's dive right into it. We are first going to start with the people. There are 9 individuals that I'm highlighting with the project. At the end of this section, we'll hear from Tina and Craig to highlight 2 of the stories you're about to hear. It's kind of a lightning round, so I hope you don't get overwhelmed with the amount of information I'm about to throw at you. We've got limited time, but I wanted to make sure to touch on each of the subjects, and there's quite a few of them. So here we go. The first subject is Adrienne Fouzy, one of 2 openly lesbian African-American curators working in the US in the early 20th century, or late 20th century, sorry. She lived and worked in the Bay Area throughout her career from high school onward. She was an educator, a poet, an author, a musician, and her radical self-expression came in the form of her visionary curatorial practice. She was mostly active in the early to mid 1990s, curating shows that focused on computer-generated art, contemporary abstract art, and sculpture. She was also a very reflective and personal author. Her archives are full of journals of poems and poetry and musings and reflections. And she also had an evocative curator's statement for each of her shows. I'll read you one of her quotes later, which I think really resonates with this current moment. In August 1994, Adrienne showed her artistic instinct by curating a show called Primal Edge at Somar Gallery, featuring works from Desert Sightworks and Burning Man. To my knowledge, one of the earliest shows of Burning Man art staged in the Bay Area or elsewhere. I love seeing these early photos of Burning Man. If you've been, you know that it's nothing like this today. Being a curator in the early 90s meant reviewing thousands and thousands of slides submitted by artists who are interested in representation or inclusion in group shows. Her files of the archives are a treasure trove of art from the late 20th century. Her shows typically ran for a period of about 1 to 2 months. She always wrote a reflection at the end of each show, kind of reviewing the coverage and what happened with the show, if there's any interest, if any stories were picked up in the press. She also had an exciting vision for each of her shows and a flair for the dramatic. At the opening of her Torch and Anvil show, which you can see the flyer for here, she actually had local artisans build a sign out of scrap metal, which was then displayed throughout the show, which I think is really exciting. Also, she was a founding board member of the Queer Cultural Center. Her archive contained a lot of the original calls for artists, and as well as some original floor plans and ideas for the gallery space there. She wrote their first vision statement, which is actually still used today on their website. Envision a place to proudly present queer art, a place to discover and explore the queer art experience, a place to encounter contemporary queer sensibility, a place to critically discuss and define queer aesthetics. Her poster can be seen at Market and First Street. As her gallery, Gallery Fouzy, was located at Harrison and First. Oops. The next subject we'll be talking about is Barbara May Cameron. She was born on May 22nd, 1954 on the Standing Rock Native American Reservation. Yes, the same one I just mentioned, in Fort Yates, North Dakota. She was a writer, a photographer, a mother, and a community and political leader. Her archive is actually at the San Francisco Public Library and not at the Historical Society, but you can go and request the materials from the SF History Center on the 6th floor once they reopen. Her radical self-expression came in the form of her radical intersectionality. She was an advocate truly in every sense of the word for every member of the queer community, not just the Native American or lesbian populations. She's seen here embracing Jesse Jackson at a campaign rally in the 1988 during his bid for the presidency, photo by Rink. She also later served as president and co-chair of the Alice B. Toklas LGBT Democratic Club, the first registered democratic club in the nation for LGBT individuals. So there's another first for you. In another first, she co-founded Gay American Indians with Randy Burns in 1975. Their mission was in order to share experience, provide support for one another, and to help make visible third world leadership in the lesbian and gay community. And it was the first organization of its kind in the nation. She was also the early executive director of community watchdog organization Community United Against Violence, established in a response to a wave of anti-LGBT crime in the early 90s. It was not her most successful venture, actually. She was ousted after a public spat with the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence over the sponsorship of the Castro Halloween celebration, which I don't say to highlight as a failure, but I feel like often when we talk about these queer figures, we tend to hold them up on a pedestal and not realize that they were people too. They made mistakes. They got into fights with each other. And I think it's just worth knowing that they're not some, impenetrable hero. Her activism was exceptionally intersectional. In the mid 80s, she traveled to Nicaragua with Somos Hermanas to protest post-revolutionary policies that suppressed women's rights. She chained herself to the San Francisco Federal Building in order to participate in the AIDS Arc Vigil, which is still the longest running act of civil disobedience in San Francisco, lasted 10 years. So if you're getting tired from the Black Lives Matter movement, just gird your loins, it's gonna be a long time. Her essay, Fry Bread in Berlin, about attending the International Conference on AIDS as a representative of the American Indian AIDS Foundation spurred this reflection, which is profound. I come from one country of genocide and Holocaust to another country of genocide and Holocaust to attend the International Conference on a disease of genocide and Holocaust. So I think even in her own mind, she was always thinking about intersectionality and the ways that things were related to one another. Lastly, she was also a member of the planning committee of the 1980 Gay Freedom Day celebration. Although unhappy with the representation of speakers on the main stage, she actually staged her own protest during Pride and gave an unannounced speech, which you'll hear a snippet of at the end of the talk. It worked. It was an amazing speech, which still rings true today. And also the next year, she was instilled as the co-chair of the entire Pride celebration. So you really have to get in there and ask for what you want. Her poster can be seen at Market and Drum Street. As an early organizer of the Pride Planning Committee, I thought placing her towards the start of the Pride Parade would be an appropriate location. Our next subject is Drago Renteria, born in 1967, still living in the Mission. He is a first of his kind deaf, queer, Latinx trans man, known to many as the father of deaf queer activism. He's been living in the Bay for 31 years. In 1999, he was one of the very first deaf people to openly transition in the country. His radical act of self-expression comes in the way that he has created community for deaf queers around the nation and across the world. He ran the Deaf, Gay, and Lesbian Center from 1992 to 1995. It was the first of its kind in the nation. It then led him to found the Deaf Queer Resource Center in 1995, which he still runs today. He runs a small internet company called Deaf Vision as well since 1997, which allows him to create resources and websites for other deaf queer groups. So he's really super active fixture of the community. He's also a photojournalist and documentary photographer. He has photographed for El Tecolote, which is a mission-based bilingual publication for a number of years. He's a staunch advocate for the mission's Latinx community and has participated in innumerable anti-gentrification and anti-police brutality protests. He also has run the National Deaf LGBTQ Archive since 1994 out of his home. He participates in photographs and documents the Trans March frequently. Again, this is some of the photos that I showed earlier in the presentation, but I just love this Pride Means poster because this is exactly what Pride is. You can view Drago's poster at Market and Beale Street, which is near where the Transgender Law Center, another organization he's affiliated with, hosted their 15th anniversary celebration. Excuse me. Our next subject is Jerome Caja. He was an artist, active, alive from 1958 to 1995. He really used what was available to create his own universe, and his act of radical self-expression defied the supposed laws of gender and accepted art practices in the late 20th century. He's another figure whose archive is dispersed amongst many institutions, but they include the Smithsonian, the SF MoMA, the SF Art Institute. He also has 2 paintings that are in the permanent collection of the Historical Society, but in all of this research, I actually forgot to ask Ramon to pull them for me. So that'll be another treasure to explore someday. In 1986, he earned a master's degree in ceramics from the SF Art Institute. However, his art practice shifted almost immediately to painting after his graduation. He often painted what Nayland Blake described as what you might find in a drag queen's purse, using nail polish, eyeliner, lipstick, and glitter on found objects. This painting on the right is one of my favorites. It's called Bird Screaming at Her Eggs, which I think is a prime example of his deranged humor and sharp wit. His works tend to be a bit shocking, but once you get past all of the piss and dicks and semen, he really has a lot to say on religion, on death, on family dynamics. His work is just really incredible. His aesthetic as an individual is often referred to as gender fuck, meaning he didn't take the binaries between men and women seriously at all. This is actually, I think, a shot of him at his thesis show at the Art Institute. So he was expressing himself in this way from an early point in his career. He often go-go danced at Club Uranus, and I use quotes because from what I understand, it often devolved into a wrestling match on top of the bar. Most of the photos that I found of Jerome depict him in a rough, smeared makeup with long, disheveled hair and some kind of fishnet stockings either on his arms or on his legs. Another aspect of Jerome's work that I really find radical is his use of veiled imagery to grapple with his strict Catholic upbringing and his own mortality after he contracted HIV. Lastly, I love these images of Jerome in some of his signature looks at Pride, here on the left in an undated photo, which is obviously an exact dead ringer for his photo or his works that depicted Venus. Also here on the right is Jerome at Folsom Street Fair and his character Duck Feet, which I would have to guess is due to the duct tape duck feet that he's wearing on his kitten heels. You can see Jerome's poster at Market and 7th Street, which is not far from his final address in Hayes Valley, where he died in 1995. The next figure is Jose Julio Sarria, who was born in 1922 or 3, depending on who you ask, and died in 2013. I have been thinking of him lately as queer San Francisco's patron saint. His sense of humor, his theatrical nature, and his visionary leadership have all made him what queer SF is today. His radical self-expression stems from his entire story arc, from his early days as a performer to his history-making run for supervisor, his status as a serial co-founder of some of SF's most important queer institutions, and finally in his last act where he positioned himself amongst the all-time San Francisco great eccentrics as the Widow Norton. Jose's archive at the Historical Society is deep. It's almost 65 linear feet and over 130 boxes, which makes it, I think, one of the biggest that they have in their collection. And it was the most exciting for me. He's a really well-known and prominent figure in queer history, but there's just so much more to his story that you can see through the photos and materials that are in his collection. He got his start as a performer at the Black Cat. This is an image of him in his Aida getup, the Egyptian princess, at SF Pride. This is the original Nightingale of Montgomery Street logo that he used in his stage performances there. He quickly turned his prowess as a performer and his humor to galvanize his political platform. He was the first publicly or openly gay candidate for public office in the United States when he ran for supervisor in 1961. He finished 5th out of 29 candidates and got over 5,500 votes, which really proved the power of the queer vote. This is an artifact actually that I've seen quite a few times, but I love seeing it at the archives, but it's because it's actually a postcard. You don't ever really see pictures of the back, and I didn't put one in the deck for some reason, but I like the idea that this is something that you see all the time, but it's actually meant to serve a function. It was a way to build momentum for his platform. He was also a prolific and intersectional activist. He co-founded no less than 4 of SF's iconic queer institutions. For this project, I'm focusing on 3 of those 4, the Tavern Guild, the Society for Individual Rights, and the Imperial Court of San Francisco, because in a Venn diagram, the 3 of them all have Jose squarely at the center, and there's a lot of membership overlap between the 3. This is a photo of Jose manning the grill at a Tavern Guild picnic. The Tavern Guild, which began in 1962, linked the gay bars in San Francisco for the first time. It was co-founded to counteract constant police harassment that gay bar owners faced. From what I can tell, from what I've seen, it was a little bit dry and masculine in its presentation. So I love the idea of Jose being at the barbecue in his feather boa and parasol and kitten heels, manning the grill. That just screams Jose to me. The Society for Individual Rights is the next one. It was at the one time the nation's largest homophile organization. The Sur Community Center on 6th Street, 83 6th Street, was the nation's first queer community center and played host to a smorgasbord of different queer social and activist groups. The Imperial Court of San Francisco officially began as an offshoot of the Tavern Guilds, organized to educate and cultivate a greater community sense of gay pride, identity, and unity. It was at a 1964 Beaux-Arts ball that the Tavern Guild was holding that he was crowned queen of the ball, but then immediately declared himself empress, saying, "We're all queens, and why become a queen when you can become an empress?" And thus he became Empress Norton I. Jose eventually purchased the burial plot right next to the Emperor Norton in Colma and started a tradition for the Imperial Court to go down there each year to commemorate the legendary figure. I won't explain Emperor Norton right now, but look him up when you have time. It's another really interesting, eccentric story. You can see here Jose dressed up as the widowed Norton. So they would actually go to the cemetery to Emperor Norton's burial plot and do a whole procession and ceremony. I came across this photo in the archives and I didn't have any historical context. It was kind of in a random collection, but from what I can tell, this is Jose dedicating his own burial plot. Because if you look at the photo that includes both of their graves, he's standing right where his headstone should be. So I think this really just speaks to his humor and his ridiculous personality. There's other few bonus shots I just included because they were fun to find. So here's Jose with then NYC Mayor Rudy Giuliani, yuck, at the Stonewall 25th anniversary celebration. Here's Jose at some pink triangle commemoration. I don't know if this was the first one or an anniversary, but they invited Jose to speak dramatically at the top of Twin Peaks. I also love this photo of Jose engaged in a gay wedding at Phoebe's, which was a notorious leather bar in Soma. I think this really just speaks to Jose's ability to bring really different crowds together. And on his epitaph itself, it reads, "United we stand, divided they catch us one by one," which is especially poignant in today's world. So you can see his poster at Market and Stewart Street, which is right in front of 90 Market Street, where he operated a short-lived bar known as the Talk of the Town after the Black Cat closed. The next subject is Kasich Wang. Kasich was a Chinese-American wearable art creator and fashion designer born in Chinatown. He grew up during the Summer of Love, Haight-Ashbury heyday and was inspired by that countercultural movement for his own art. His radical self-expression comes at the intersection of his unabashed creativity with the uniqueness of his queerness and his Chinese ancestry. His materials are largely from the collection at the De Young Museum and the Legion of Honor. There were a few things at the archives, but mostly coming from fine arts museums in San Francisco. He was a naturally shy and quiet individual around most, but also a visionary, creative, and goofball with his close friends. These are actually photos taken by Cheryl Ito, who was a friend and collaborator. I found them at the SF Art Institute library. Jeff Gunderson, who's the librarian there, big shout out to him for introducing me to Kasich. They, I think, really show his fun and affable nature when he could get over his shyness. So obviously like a one-on-one environment, I think, was good for him. He was also a San Francisco boy through and through, and a Chinatown boy through and through. He designed this float in 1977 for the Chinese New Year's parade. It's actually a dress that becomes a float draped over an unmovable armature that was pulled through the street. You can also see in this photo that it was lit up and painted in bright psychedelic colors. This, I just wanted to add as a evidence of the way that I had to do some of my research. Without a light table, you can just turn your computer on the side and use a little magnifying glass to get the shot. Kasich's work is honestly captivating. I think it's my favorite story by far that I discovered from this project. It's amazing the work that he created, and he's still so unknown. His muse was Merle Bulatao, a Chinese-American model that he met while she was working at legendary San Francisco department store I. Magnin. He would dress her in his garments and then shoot her editorial style across the city. So here he is walking with her. I believe these are the flower fields near Monterey. So they would take excursions for these amazing photos. He was thrust into the international spotlight a decade after his death when Nicolas Ghesquière, who was then the designer for Balenciaga women's wear, copied his vest and made it into this horrible dress. When confronted with the plagiarism, Ghesquière simply said, yes, I did it, and there were no repercussions. There was a discussion about whether or not adapting or copying is part of the creative process, but he's gone on to become the women's wear for Louis Vuitton, so clearly there's no issue there for him. I mean, obviously it's a travesty. Lastly, Kasich's Monkey King persona drew on imagery from Chinese folklore and allowed the naturally shy Kasich to perform and to dance in public, which he loved to do. He actually became involved in Salvador Dali's inner circle via Stephen Arnold, the famed coquette originator. Here you see Kasich as the Monkey King with Dali, with Merle, and with Stephen. I'm not sure who this is, but obviously it must have been someone cool. This is the last image I'll show you, which I loved discovering at the De Young archives. So this is actually a photo of Kasich wearing the vest that Balenciaga copied as the Monkey King. So it was another moment that really kind of brought everything together. You can see his poster. Let's see, where is it? Market in Montgomery, which is not far from Britex Fabrics, which is where he would buy most of his materials for his costumes. Okay, we've got 3 more individuals and then we'll go to our first reflection, so hang in there. The next one is Lani Ka'ahumanu. She is a bisexual rights activist, poet, author, and mother. Born in 1943, she is still with us. Her mixed heritage is central to her identity and is represented in the drawing. She iconically appeared in this photo by Arlene Kranz at the 1984 International Lesbian and Gay Freedom Day, wielding her biphobia shields. This is a postcard from the Historical Society, and it's actually on one of the banners in front of the museum as well. Amazing image. I love the messaging also by and large, because she was also a lifelong advocate for body positivity. Her words, visible, vocal, proud, and strong, come from her writing, calling for the world to nurture the organic, radical integration process. Differences recognized and appreciated give a sense of the whole. She founded the nation's first bisexual political action organization, BIPOL, in 1983. She originally came out as a lesbian and moved to San Francisco in 1974, leaving her children in the care of her ex-husband. She later came out a second time as bisexual after falling in love with a man who also identified as bisexual, and helped found the San Francisco State University Women's Studies Department. She is also the co-editor of the bisexual anthology By Any Other Name, Bisexual People Speak Out. It features her own poem, Hapa Haole Wahim, which means half Hawaiian woman. It's a meditation on her mixed background and what I use to guide my research process, because she talks about every phase of her life. It's amazing. This is still one of the only bisexual collections of essays, and it's really got some powerful stuff. Lastly, in 1987, she co-founded the Bay Area Bisexual Network, BABN. These are some flyers that I found at the Historical Society that talk about their mission. Like a lot of other queer subcultures, bisexuals needed to find places, businesses they could patronize, bars they could go to and feel safe. It's all about, finding community and creating resources for others. And lastly, she was the sole bisexual speaker at the 1993 March on Washington for Lesbian, Gay, and Bi Equal Rights. She spoke last, and organizers forced her to cut her speech dramatically short moments before she was due to go on. Her words echoed powerfully across the National Mall. It ain't over until the bisexual speaks. You can view Lonnie's poster at Market and Grant Ave, not far from where that iconic photo of her was taken at Pride. The next subject is Lou Sullivan, 1951 to 1991. He was a trans historian, activist, writer, founding member of the Historical Society in 1985. He was from Milwaukee, just as am I, which I found to be a really meaningful and resonant revelation. His radical self-expression came in the form of the way he lived his life as an open book. He thoroughly documented his transition. He's dedicated his life to creating resources for individuals wanting to undergo transition from female to male. His archive is full of photos from throughout his life. Documentation goes way back to his early days as a young woman who wore men's clothes. I think in searching through his archive, it's obvious he never tried to hide any aspect of his story, including the medical journey. And my understanding is that he did this in order to provide a blueprint, a reference for people who wanted to do the same in a meaningful way so that they could actually get information they needed when undergoing this journey. He was a natural leader and founded many groups that would provide information for those looking to transition, including this pamphlet in 1980 published and prepared by him, information for the female to male. Some of the contents include cross-dressing tips, how to look 30 when you are 30, sex reassignment, and thoughts to consider on one's sex life. Apologies if those aren't any of the correct terms these days, but those are verbatim what he wrote in the pamphlet, so I know that things change quickly. This is another iteration of that same concept, a pamphlet for those looking to transition. This came from the group ETVC, which I think one of my favorite discoveries was this membership card, which reads on the back, "The person named on this card is not cross-dressed for illegal or fraudulent purposes, but rather for self-expression and emotional fulfillment," with the space for the therapist to sign, which I think just speaks to the overall way and very realistic and very mature and very, I don't know, just immense foresight that Lou had when he was participating in groups like this. I think advocating for therapy is a really important part of transition, and finding creative ways to fight against police harassment was also really important. Lou also when he was diagnosed with HIV in 1980, he dedicated his life to two goals. The first, which was publishing a book on Jack B. Garland, a notable early example of a trans man who was attracted to men. The book, From Female to Male, The Life of Jack B. Garland, is available from the SF Public Library. And on the right, you see here an interview that he did with the Historical Society in 1985, I believe. It's from one of their early newsletters. So it's just another amazing example of the recursive nature of the queer stuff that I've been digging through. Major shout out to Ellis Martin and Zachary Ozma for their new book, which is an edited selection of Lou's diaries called We Both Laughed in Pleasure, which fulfills Lou's second lifelong dream. You can view Lou's poster at Market and Taylor Street, which is right across from the GLBT Historical Archives at 989 Market. Which brings us to our last, but certainly not least subject person for this project, Teresita La Campesina, born in 1940, died in 2002, was a larger-than-life personality. She was a trans Latinx ranchera singer, although it's worth noting that although she may have identified as transgender in today's terms, she didn't use that identification herself. She identified as both a man and a woman, and her radical self-expression came in from her innate sense of self and her refusal to live up to anyone's expectations of her or her gender. Big thanks to Esther Hernandez and Tina Valentin Aguirre for providing me with this imagery from which to draw. Teresita had a way of commanding the energy and attention of any room. She was an ebullient personality in front of a crowd. She knew how to work the crowd and filled the space with her voice. We'll see an example in just a moment. She projected a strong image, often towering over her audience members in high heels and her trademark voluminous curls. She had a flair for the dramatic in her performance, which she infused with her Mexican and queer Latinx identities. She often wore a folded zarape and a dark blue sequin dress with a large magnolia flower in her hair, and big glasses. You can see that here. She, as a personality, was emblematic of the glory days of queer Latinx mission. 16th and Valencia was this epicenter of the queer Latinx universe. She often performed at La Rondalla, which is now a mixed restaurant, and Esta Noche, La India Bonita. She was also an outspoken sex worker. She was never one to shy away from the realities of her life. She commonly worked around Polk Street in the 70s and 80s. In the 1990s, she contracted HIV and shifted her focus to AIDS activism, using her charm and her magnetism to garner attention for the cause. She worked with this group, Proyecto contra SIDA por Vida, PCPV, as one of many organizations that emerged in response to the AIDS crisis. And with PCPV, Teresita helped to provide community-based healthcare for the Latinx and LGBTQ+ communities. I think that this narrative is especially true. This sign could not be more meaningful right now. It's a sign from a group from PCPV marching that reads, "We don't deserve to get killed because of who we are, transgender human beings." You can view Teresita's drawing at Market and Front Street. Its proximity to North Beach is a nod to the fact that she performed all across the city in her heyday, not just in queer establishments, but also straight ones. She was a noted and respected performer all across the region. So with that, we're gonna go to our first reflection. So I'll introduce Tina, and then Tina will do their reflection, and then I'll come back and introduce Craig, who will reflect on Jerome. So Tina will reflect on Teresita La Campesina. Tina Valentin Aguirre makes movies, writes poetry and prose, and produces art shows and artistic performances. They hold a BA in communication from Stanford University. They work at the Shanti Project as an associate director of institutional giving, and they serve as a chair of the GLBT Historical Society Board of Directors. They will be showing a short clip of Teresita in action and then providing a reflection. So I'll go ahead, I think, and stop share and mute myself, and we'll watch the video.
My family, my straight family, my so-called from the bloodline, they love me, but they don't want nothing to do with me. If they cannot understand it, that's their problem. The only family that I have is the queens and the gay men and gay people. That's my family. This is all I've had. But they understand you because they come from the same suffering. But with all that, I still carry on. So.
Me estoy muriendo por tu culpa, como si al verme y alegraras de mi suerte. Te hice que no supiste perdonarme.
Thank you all for playing that. I have to admit, I'm a little emotional seeing Teresita. She was one of my queer mothers. And the song that she sings, for those of you who don't know Spanish, is about backstabbing and her death, her demise. And I think that paired with the moment that where we're at now is, it's a little difficult to watch. It's also awesome because her monstrosity is so huge, and she was so human and flawed, like all of us, like me, and I just miss her more than ever. Teresita was a regular in on 16th Street at La Rondalla. She was a paid singer with mariachis. And she also worked in North Beach as a singer with her músicos. And often what she liked to do was to just come in and take over a place and take booze, take men, take money, and then at the very end, share her tea. And by that point, it was already too late. Everybody already loved her. So what I learned from her was, one, take up the space. And people don't have to be ready for you. And if you're gonna wait for that, you're gonna wait a long time. Take up the space. Make sure that you get paid. And so this is a little shout out to all the people of color right now who maybe are getting hit up for anti-racist stuff. Get paid, listen to one of my queer mothers, and get the money up front first. I will just share my public rate is $500 an hour because this work is shitty. And except family rates are lower, 100 an hour. But anyway, yes, Teresita, on that front, she was a sex worker who did get paid. And mind you, like many of us would have done it for free, but she needed to pay her rent. And the principle was you need to give her money. So the funny thing is that she sometimes she worked like freeways. And so like I know she liked truck stops. She liked, of course, whatever, just random streets. But I consider it this immense thing that she actually worked freeways, on-ramps. There was a time when I first got to San Francisco, I had a boat of a car, a Cutlass Supreme, I don't know, it was like early 80s Cutlass Supreme, which is a very big boat of a car in San Francisco. And I was driving on the freeway, and I remember seeing her with a friend of mine and saying, oh my God, there's Teresita. What is she doing? She must need a ride. So I literally got off the freeway, came back, pulled over to her, and at which point she educated me. You are making me lose money. And I was like, wow, because the truck drivers would literally stop and pick her up and she would make money. So anyway, shout out to all the entrepreneurs right now who are making money whatever way they can. I want to share that Teresita's legacy lives on with Ella, the trans Latinx group that's in the Mission on 16th Street, and through people who, like me, who are still around, Adela Vasquez, Elena Montes, Felicia Flames, Ronnie and Mahogany were all her sisters. And I guess what I'll just share with you in terms of how the importance of this is, I loved all of what the people that were featured by Win. And I'll just share that for me, this is kind of a circle where this time last year, I curated a show at the Historical Society called Chosen Familias. And that Teresita is somebody who I really miss. She was really a troublemaker and proud of that. And one of my favorite memories of her was were the private parties, the Dia de la Virgen parties that a member of GALA, the Gay Latino Alliance from the 70s, used to do in the Mission. Carlos Todd lived on South Venice at 16th, right past the Mission Hotel, where a whole bunch of the queens lived. And Esther Hernandez, Diane Felix, myself, a whole bunch of people were regulars at this annual Day of the Virgin party on December 12th. And inevitably, we would all get fucked up. We would all have a great time. There's some paying homage to the Virgin Mary because she's like the best drag queen in the whole wide world. And Teresita would then sing for us. And so I'm just really happy that I was able to share a little bit of her singing. And to give you a little tease, that I have lots of footage that I'm going to re-edit. I had presented a rough draft of a movie at Frameline, what was called Tranny Fest, the first Tranny Fest that was held at the Roxy Theater in '96, and Cine Accion's Film Festival, but I'm in the process of re-editing that. And I just really want to give a special thanks to Win, being able to position Teresita amongst like Lou and Jerome and so many of the people and the places that are in this show. She would have loved Pride is a Protest, and thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tina. So next we will hear from Craig. I believe I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Let's see. Can you see that okay? Okay, cool. So Craig will reflect on Jerome Caja. I already introduced Craig, but he's the program associate in public art at the San Francisco Arts Commission and the manager of the Art on Market Street kiosk poster program. So I'm going to go ahead and show Jerome's poster and take it away, Craig. I think you might still be on mute.
Can you hear me now? Okay, good. Hello again. So I actually kind of struggled a little bit on trying to figure out what to say or write about Jerome. And then I finally settled on something that I wanted to write about for my thesis on him, but it didn't quite fit. And I'm hoping that kind of reveals something a little bit new about him. And that is the way he priced his work. So for the show Toilet Water, which was held at Kiki Gallery in April of 1994, Jerome playfully priced his work, assigning a dollar amount not in terms of value, but in terms of aesthetics. The price list for Jerome was another side of performance where he injected the same humor seen within his work, but also questioned the quantitative value of art. For example, the work titled Pisces was priced at $69. The work Psalm 85:12 was $85.12. The work Three Hand Tools cost $333. There were other works that were $33.03, $88.88, $144.44. And of course, being the good Catholic that he was, the work The Bird of Happiness and the Bird of Death Having a Tug of War was $666. There was a wide range of pricing from $20 for Father Fairy to the comically overpriced $9,000 for a work called Chorus, which was nail polish on ancient Greek statuary. Meaning he probably didn't want to sell this work, but might be willing to part with it for $9,000. By pricing work this way, Jerome is being inclusive, making his work available to a range of income levels, showing his understanding of the disparities in our economic system, and revealing his own generous spirit. Perhaps the most significant way Jerome showed his generosity is pricing a work as an IOU. The work The Infinity Within Your Grasp is listed as IOU 50 cents, meaning that if you buy this work, Jerome owes you 50 cents. The owner of the work thus receives both the work and 50 cents from the artist. So he kind of playfully challenges our notion of value and graciously and humorously offers his work as a gift, which the SFMOMA media arts curator at the time, Robert Riley, received. In the book, Queer Art of Failure by Jack Halberstam, he notes that queerness is a mode of critique rather than a new investment in normativity or respectability or legitimacy. Jerome was not interested in legitimizing himself as an artist by creating a standardized value for his work. Instead, he uses pricing as a queer side of disruption. In this way, he subverted the normative price list, creating a humorous and generous performance and a campy capitalist critique. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Craig. I love those prices. Those are great. Okay, so now let's go ahead and move on to the places. There are 6 places featured in Pride as a Protest, and we will begin with the Center for Sex and Culture. The Center for Sex and Culture, which closed in 2019, was the brainchild of Dr. Carol Queen and Dr. Robert Lawrence. It was envisioned as a place of resistance that aimed to provide non-judgmental, sex-positive sexuality education to support diverse populations by means of classes, workshops, social gatherings, and hands-on practical skills building events. To maintain and house these events and supporting materials and functions, to maintain a publicly accessible library and archives, and to staff and support this learning environment. So located at 1349 Mission Street between 2001 and 2019, CSC housed a vast library of books, zines, and other physical resources about sex and the various subcultures that formed around different preferences. They also hosted a variety of programs and workshops from mild to wild, including an art exhibition program managed by gallery director Dorian Katz, who we're going to hear from shortly. I'm looking at this active resistance as providing education for those who don't normally receive it. CSC supported programs like Scarlet Teen, which provided inclusive and supportive sexual health information to teens, not just straight sex, but gay sex, and the full spectrum of sexuality. They also served as a community center of sorts for the trans and gender nonconforming communities. I witnessed firsthand how it served as a DIY community center for the transgender, non-binary, and gender nonconforming communities. I love this sign that I grabbed from the CSC blog that just says assume nothing. I think that's the right approach to take. CSC also frequently staged bondage and rope work demonstrations for the Bay Area BDSM crowd. They provided free resources for myriad groups of all ages, sexes, races, and genders. They also hosted things like marathon mutual masturbation sessions. They hosted memorials, Folsom Street Fair parties, and a slew of other amazing events. CSC sadly closed after their rent hiked to more than $10,000, and now the building is just sitting vacant. Classic San Francisco of 2020. The pieces of the archive that will stay in San Francisco are now at the GLBT Historical Society and the San Francisco Public Library's Hormel LGBTQIA Center. You can view the CSC poster on Market and 7th Street right around the corner from their former home on Mission Street. The next place is Klubsitute, which wasn't necessarily a brick and mortar place, but it was a riotous weekly queer punk underground happening that was staged in San Francisco in the early 1990s. I first read about this in Alvin Orloff's book, Disasterama, which he will talk to you in a little bit. It was the brainchild of Michael Collins, AKA Diet Popstitute, and his band of co-conspirators. His band, the Popstitutes, which included Alvin Orloff and Tyler Ingolia, also were regulars and hosts of the event. Klubsitute's resistance came from the way it provided a space for radical self-expression and as a gathering place for ACT UP and other activists. Its patrons, which included Jerome Caja, who's pictured here on the left, embraced the DIY aesthetic of San Francisco. It's kind of like a club kid look with a grungy punk, trashy overlay, which I think is still kind of the aesthetic that San Francisco embraces, true San Francisco embraces today. Klubsitute was a mashup of different artistic and creative genres, ranging from spoken word and comedy to punk rock and play acting. Elvis Herselvis was a frequent performer. On the right, we see Diet Popstitute in another iconic photo taken by Dan Nicoletta. Cross-pollination was a big part of Klubsitute's goal. So the same bill might have any combination of musical acts, drag queens and kings, performance art, underground films, and live theater. Just the idea of forcing people to be in proximity with one another and to interact created an atmosphere that was akin to that of a salon, one of the only queer clubs in town where being creative gave you more cred than being cute. The AIDS epidemic obviously electrified San Francisco club scene in the early 90s, not only as an outlet for the relentless and emotionally exhausting nature of living in a time of widespread death, but as a gathering space for queer activism after the protests. Club Chaos, Club Uranus, and Klubsitute were 3 different concurrent expressions of the same concept. According to Alvin, if you didn't turn up for your performance, a blow-up doll would serve as your stand-in, which you can see, one here on the left. I love that idea. You can view the Klubsitute poster, ironically, right in front of the Westfield Mall at Market and 4th Street. It's the juxtaposition of these two really makes me laugh. Next, we're going to talk about Mods. Mods was a well-known lesbian bar in San Francisco. It also kind of served as a de facto community center throughout the 1970s and 80s. It first opened at 937 Cole Street in Cole Valley in 1966. And its resistance came from the way it embodied the free-spirited nature of the Haight-Ashbury counterculture. Most of the imagery here is taken from the Mods Reunion Facebook page, although I did find some good stuff in the business ephemera selection at the archives. According to the 1993 documentary Last Call at Mods, the bar came to enjoy an international reputation as the quintessential meeting place for nonconformist women and their friends. Here we see Ricky Streaker, who is the Mods owner and proprietor. I don't know if I said her name right, but there it is, Ricky. Mods was a member of the Tavern Guild Association before it dissolved in 1995. The bar frequently held theme nights and kind of acted as a de facto end-up spot after the parade, which you can see here in flyer. Amelia's was the sister bar, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to Valencia Street. Because Ricky had a huge extracurricular interest in sports, so it was also a central gathering spot for participants in a variety of women's sports leagues, including softball, pool, and bowling, amongst others. It also had a pool table inside. Ricky also helped to organize the Gay Games in San Francisco in 1982, and later went on to go co-found the Gay Games Federation, so another first. Mods was a hangout for bisexual and lesbian hippies of the Haight-Ashbury during the summer of love and beyond. Supposedly Janis Joplin and her then girlfriend Jay Whitaker would frequent the bar, as would Del Martin and Phyllis Lyon, who you see here, getting a little tipsy at Mods. I love seeing them here and represented in the Last Call at Mods documentary because, like so many other queer civil rights heroes, I feel like Phyllis and Del are often portrayed as these untouchable, infallible figures, whereas in reality they like to smoke cigarettes and drink beer just like the rest of us. So I just love the notion of kind of breaking down some of those walls. You can view the Mods poster at Market and 6th Street. I placed it there because it's right around the corner from where the SUR Center was. And as the SUR, Society for Individual Rights, and the Tavern Guild were very closely linked, I thought it was an appropriate spot. The next place is Theater Rhinoceros. It's the nation's oldest and longest running queer theater. It still operates today out of Spark Arts in the Castro, assuming once it survives COVID. It was founded in 1977 by the visionary theater queer Alan B. Estes, who died at just 29 from complications of AIDS. He moved here from Boston with one goal: to establish a theater where lesbians and gay men could go to make and see theater that reflected the realities of homosexual life. It provided a queer San Francisco theater folks an outlet to express themselves. The archives contain so many great examples of posters and promotional materials and season, the bills for the seasonal productions of Theater Rhinoceros. It also provided an outlet for really fun and quirky advertisements and posters for their art. I loved the hands, the grabby hands being repurposed in this bathhouse scene for this poster for Night Sweat. In 1987, Theater Rhinoceros garnered national attention for staging a production called Artists in Death, Involved with Death and Survival, the AIDS Show, a seminal and deeply personal reflection on the devastation of the disease that was wreaking havoc in the gay community in San Francisco and beyond. Obviously, their founder was taken with so many. You can see the Theater Rhinoceros poster at Market and 3rd Street, just down Geary Street from its original home at the Goodman Building. So we've got 2 more places. The next will be the Toolbox, which was a legendary leather bar that helped establish Soma's reputation as the leather capital of the world. Opened in 1962, it featured this striking mural by artist and bartender Chuck Arnett. It closed in 1971 when it was zoned for redevelopment, and right now it's a Whole Foods. A 1964 feature on homosexuality in America by Life magazine, which was then one of the most popular magazines in America, featured the Toolbox's iconic mural depicting Leatherman, painted by Chuck Arnett. I love this subheader. A secret world goes open in Boulder. Society is forced to look at it and try to understand it. Very mysterious. At the time of its debut, the bar was radical and exclusionary, frankly, for its stance on masculinity. It tried to debunk the myth that all gay men were effeminate. In fact, there were apparently a pair of tennis shoes that hung over the bar as a symbol of the fashion-conscious, swished gay men the bar's clientele would reject at the door. They did also employ a signature aesthetic developed by Mike Caffey, who you might know for his figure, the Phoebe's iconic leather David. He also portrayed George Washington in leather, which I find to be hilarious. Just the idea of a founding father be all dolled up in a leather jacket. The bar catered to several gay motorcycle gangs, most prominently a group known as the Warlocks. The imagery that I found, though, was from another group that patronized the bar, the Satyrs. If you look up their Flickr, they've got a bunch of really amazing photos of what it was like to be in a gay motorcycle gang in the 60s and 70s. You can view the poster at Market and 4th Street, just down 4th from where it originally stood at 4th and Harrison. And the last place that I'm featuring is the Valencia corridor. So definitely more of a neighborhood than an individual bar or a party. In the 1970s and 80s, Valencia Street was a daring microcosm of the queer community. It was a safe corner of the city carved out by visionary lesbians who sought freedom from the constraints of the heteronormative and patriarchal mainstream society. It was popular locally, internationally, so much so that a Women's Guide to Valencia Street was published a number of years consecutively. The Historical Society has lots of great ephemera for businesses from this era. I love these lesbian guides, lesbian women's guides, because they kind of all have their own different look and feel. You can see the evolution of graphic design throughout the years. This is from 1981, sorry, 1982, question mark. This one, I believe, is from 1985 and 1987. As I mentioned before, Amelia's was another great, really popular and well-known gathering spot. It was the sister bar to Maud's, and it was owned and operated by the same owner, Ricky Stricker. These are the opening and closing announcements from the Business Ephemera collection, which is something that you kind of see frequently, I think, in the Historical Society archives. You'll see a whole selection of materials throughout the lifespan of an entire business. So it's a little sad, honestly, like nostalgic to see the opening announcement, come fly with us, and then come celebrate the last call at Amelia's. And once again, you can see the amazing progression of graphic design from the late 70s to the early 90s. Also important about Valencia's was that it carved out space for different representations of lesbian life, from butch fashion to women's theater performance. I had a friend tell me once that he looks like Lea Delaria, so Michael, that's for you. Old Wives' Tales was emblematic of the women's bookstore movement at the time, which produced lesbian and feminist literature. I love the repurposing of the lesbian rights sign on this old statue, men in their powdered wigs. As founder of Old Wives' Tales, Carol CJ said, there was a sense then that if we wanted to turn over patriarchy, we could. We had a vision that women could learn to do it for ourselves, that we could make our own mistakes, and I still believe this passionately. My favorite collection, Valencia Street, was actually from the Women's Press Collective. There's a whole series, a whole giant couple of boxes in the oversized collection of the archives that have these amazing posters from the Women's Press Collective. From things like Dykes on Parade to the Motherlode. I love this woman just like standing in the Wild West with her shotgun. International Women's Day poster, which I used as the main source image for the poster. This iconic women's street fair, first women's street fair. I forget the year, but it's on display at the Historical Society Museum as well. And then this amazing poster, this is just a close-up. It's called Lesbians Who by M. Lloyd, created in 1982. I feel like this could be turned into like a rad bathroom wallpaper or something for a lesbian bar. I'll read you just some of my favorites, which are obviously Lesbians Who Frighten Men, lesbian wrestlers, lesbian astronauts, lesbians, lesbian race car drivers, lesbians in high school, lesbians who lie to the boys. It really just has something for every type of lesbian. This poster can be viewed at Market and Sutter. Unfortunately, there wasn't really a great evocative space, but hopefully a lot of people will see it at this location. So with that, we're going to take our next jump to the panelist. So we're going to hear from Dorian Katz on the Center for Sex and Culture. So Dorian, aka Poppers the Pony, is a visual artist and served as the Center for Sex and Culture's gallery director for 8 years. So Dorian, I've got all of your images in the slideshow here. So when you want me to go to the next one, just say next.
Thank you so much, Win. I think you can just, I was thinking you'd just start with them and show them for like 15 seconds each. They're not, I'm not really talking about them specifically.
Sounds good.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me, Win. Everyone at CSC, including myself, are so honored to be part of your project. And a big thank you to the Historical Society for this event. I enjoy my membership and utilizing the archive for various projects, including a drawing of Adrienne Fuzet, who we talked about earlier. And I wanted to acknowledge a couple of folks tuning in from CSC who continue to shape my life, Maya and Ree, and Alex, who co-curated 2 very special shows with me, and Anissa Milady, AKA Library Vixen, who basically mastermind how the library program was run and cataloged. One small correction in the description of CSC, and that is, in not the description, but after we moved out, Transgender Intersex Justice Project moved in, and we couldn't think of a better organization to fill that space after us. Like Win said, we were a community center for judgment-free education, cultural events. We had a library and archive accessible to adults only. And I want to stress that we provided community for all adults interested in sexuality and gender. The founders and most of the staff identify as LGBTQ, and we were a queer organization, but we were really for and served everyone. We were founded around 20 years ago by Doctors Carol Queen and Robert Lawrence. Between the 2 of them, they have 60+ years of experience teaching sex education. Both are sexologists and authors, bisexuals, AIDS activists, sex party throwers, former sex workers, and things I will not say on the internet live. CSC was inspired by the events happening at 848 Divisadero, a space where performance artists Keith Hennessy and other fabulously freaky queers were living and organizing. Carol and Robert were part of a circle, of that circle, and often organized events there, including Perverts Put Out, which was a literary performance series, and the Queen of Heaven, all gender, safer sex parties. These events continued with the birth of CSC. At the urging of their mentor, Betty Dodson, a pioneer of the pro-sex feminist movement, Carol and Robert began creating a space for the events and their collection of books and materials. CSC rented space in Soma for roughly 20 years. We moved locations several times until we finally had to close our doors in March of last year. Wherever we went, there was always art. Usually it was hung because someone asked to have a show, or it was in conjunction with an event. For example, sex worker and sex worker rights activist Carol Lee organized shows for artist sex workers to accompany her numerous projects, and the San Francisco Jacks, a men's masturbation social group that started during the early years of the HIV/AIDS crisis, had several art shows and jack-off parties at our space twice a month. When CSC moved into its final space at 1349 Mission, I became gallery director. It was always the kind of place that if someone thought something should happen and was willing to do the work to make it happen, it did. My goals as art director was to ensure that each group that showed up saw themselves represented in art at some point. We wanted to show that art about sex is just as valid and intelligent as art about anything else. Because art about sex is often censored, banned, or neglected by galleries, museums, and alternative art spaces, we made the shunted art our focus. Art that is for the tame has the rest of the world as its site for approval. In addition to the visual art on the walls, there were performances and arty fundraisers like Nude Aid and the Masturbate-a-thon, porn screenings, book festivals, classes on pole dancing, sex parties, and countless educational workshops. I'm proud of what we were able to do and for the knowledge and friendships I take with me. CSC's mission to serve adults of all sexualities and genders, people engaging in transactional, non-traditional and divergent sex or no sex at all, with kinks or without, set us apart from other organizations in the field of sex and gender. Our archives and the community we serve tell a story of how all these groups beautifully intersect, support, and inform one another in the Bay Area. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dorian. And noted on the update, I will say that goes for any piece here too. I pieced together a lot of this through what I could find. So definitely if you see things I need to update or information that's wrong, please reach out to me. And it's a work in progress, so there's nothing that can be changed. So thank you, I will update that. And also thank you for including this photo, Dorian. This was actually one of my first artistic forays in the public eye, part of a show called Doing Your Dirty Work. I can't remember what year, but it was a lot of fun to participate in that. So next we have Alvin Orloff, who's going to reflect on Klubsitute. So as I alluded to earlier, Alvin Orloff is a queer writer and bookseller living in San Francisco. He is the author of 3 novels, and his recently published memoir, Disasterama, Adventures in the Queer Underground, 1977 to 1997, has been nominated for a Lando Literary Award, and is a great read. That's, as I said, this is what inspired me to do the Klubsitute poster. So Alvin, please take it away.
But I will try to be lively. And thanks for having me, and thanks to the Historical Society. So everyone wants to be part of a happening scene, especially when you're young. There's nothing more fun than joining a crew of people who hang out together in order to be creative, supportive, and maybe a little naughty. During the early 1990s, Klubsitute was all those things and more. It began in 1990 when my best friend, a human whirlwind going by the name Diet Popstitute, took over programming for Tuesday nights at a Mission dive bar called the Crystal Pistol. I should mention in the mid to late 1980s, bars were desperate to get people into, because everyone was scared to go out because of AIDS and queer bashing and the nightmare. So at any rate, Diet just actually first started out with something called Out of Order, which was an open mic for queer people. And open mics were a new thing back then. They were very popular with kind of alternative bohemian people. And there wasn't an all queer open mic that, at least that we knew of. And of course, back then you didn't always know everything because there was no internet. But there was no all queer open mic. So Diet started one. It was so popular that the bar said, why don't you just take a whole night and do whatever you want? And Diet decided we would open Klubsitute. Now you hear me say we. Who is this we I speak of? It was the Popstitutes, which was Diet's homocore band / performance art troupe. And so that was Tyler Bob Mongolia, Xeon, Fruit Fly, myself, Brad Kellogg, and a whole host of other people. It was kind of a big, wild crew. Anyways, Diet was easily bored and wanted to promote cross-cultural pollination, or maybe I should say cross-countercultural pollination. San Francisco had drag queens and punk rockers and video and live theater and open mics and dance troupes and everything, but it didn't have them all together. All these different artistic tendencies stayed in their own scenes, you know, and so he wanted to have all the queer people looking at each other's art. And he would do that. You would go out to Klubsitute and not know what you were going to see if you hadn't seen a poster, and you know, just kind of wander in and you would be surprised, which was great. But of course, he was also really interested in breaking down the barriers between performer and audience. So to do that, he insisted that we have lots of contests, fortune-telling booths, stalls where people could sell zines, little Xeroxed magazines that people would self-produce. There were ballroom dancing classes, nude sketch modeling. There was a sex worker writing workshop, and we also, because Pride is a Protest is the theme of this, I'll mention that on the very first May Day in 1990, our first May Day, the club consisted of a protest march through the Castro under a big banner that said no assimilation, which I think we just meant don't be boring and conformist. And we kind of marched around and wound up in a park next to the Crystal Pistol, where we had erected a giant maypole of a certain phallic nature. And everyone danced around like wild fairies. So we kind of combined the holidays' pagan and radical roots. Now, most nightclubs appeal to one type of person, but Klubsitute attracted a real mix of just like regular old gay guys and queens and dykes and punks and drunks and aspiring artistes, radical fairies, goths, club kids, activists, and all sorts of unclassifiable misfits. And back then, even more than now, I think there were a lot of clubs where all anyone really cared about was looking hot and hooking up. But at Klubsitute, you could go out and talk to people. People would talk to you even if you were an unfuckable weirdo, because that's what it was all about. It was all about going out and being interesting and seeing interesting things. So our happening scene did become a creative community in which people could discuss their art projects and their opinions. And this was deliberate. Diet and all of us had a lot of theories and opinions about art, and we believed that political democracy was impossible without cultural democracy. And cultural democracy meant that everyone participates in creating the culture, not, you know, no passive consumption. Just don't sit back and let the TV entertain you. You go out and you make the culture that you participate in. After our first year, Klubsitute outgrew the Crystal Pistol, and we moved to larger digs up at Brave New World, a club way up in the Haight, which seemed like a really long far away, because back then gay people didn't go to certain neighborhoods because you would get queer bashed. And that was a problem when we moved there. People would come into the club, I just, you know, had to run for my life. But at any rate, that was where the club kind of hit its stride, and there were some performances there that are just burned into my head. Miss Bambi Lake doing her tribute to the Coquettes, and the Sick and Twisted Players, a fabulous genderfuck theater troupe. I remember seeing Justin Vivian Bond, who's very famous now, as Rosemary from Rosemary's Baby, just a whole lot of wonderful things. Later, the club started losing people because there were a lot of other clubs opening up that were displaying queer acts, and we ended up moving to the End Up, and then to the Stud, and then to the 11th Hour, and then to like all over the place. We just kept moving because our crowd was shrinking because people kept dying or getting too busy being sick to go out, and it was a shrinking scene. And I have to say that because of that, people behaved differently, not just at Klubsitute, but anywhere you went in the early 1990s. You would listen to people a little more closely because you didn't know if that person was going to be alive the next time you saw them. You didn't necessarily know. Some people, it was very obvious they were sick, but people would get sick and die just like overnight. So you would go out and you would pay a little more attention to people, and you might talk about stuff that's a little more serious than you'd be normally inclined to at a young person nightclub. People might talk about, you know, what's the proper way to commemorate the dead, and how should art address mortality, and what should we do about all these queer bashings in the political situation, and what do we owe the sick and dying? These were all things that we had to think about, even though we were young and wanted to be really flippant and shallow. Now, the sick and dying also included Diet, who you know, was our ringleader, booker, MC, ringleader. He kept getting sicker and sicker throughout the run of the club, and by 1995, he was on his last legs and he passed away. Unfortunately, the club didn't really survive him. There was a little spin-off sort of Klubsitute, the next generation, that went on for a few years focusing on drag. But the original anarchic, throw everything into the mix club passed away. And then the cultural moment that had produced it was past because you didn't have to be quite as serious all the time because of the I'm not going to say the end of the AIDS crisis, but the diminishment of the AIDS crisis here. Obviously, it's still raging in the world today. And looking back at that little moment of Klubsitute, I have to say that it was more than anything fun. That's what I want you to leave with the impression of Klubsitute, is that it was a fun way to go out. And I still think that people participating in the culture they produces the best culture, and it's the most fun. That's it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that reflection. Okay, we are on the home stretch here. I know we're almost about at time for the event, but we've got probably 15 more minutes or a little bit less. So we'll try to zip through this last part. The last segment is fortunately only 3 protests. So starting off with the 1965 Council on Religion and the Homosexual New Year's Day Ball. It was called San Francisco Stonewall by the Bay Area Reporter, although obviously it occurred some 4 years before Stonewall. It gathered together San Francisco's 6 homophile groups to co-sponsor a dance on New Year's Day 1965 to raise funds for the Council on Religion and the Homosexual, a group founded to encourage the dialogue between the church and various members of the organization. I won't dive too much into the actual proceedings of the event, but suffice to say, the ministers from the Council on Religion and Homosexual, who actually were from Glide Memorial Church, had a conversation early on with the SFPD asking them to stay away from this event. This was a private benefit event, so technically the police wouldn't be allowed in without a warrant anyway. And then, as you can guess, when revelers arrived for the party, the police were there taking photos and harassing and intimidating guests. Out of 1,500 tickets sold, only 600 people showed up. But the people that did show up defied police harassment and actually stood between the police and entering the event. So it led to some arrests by lawyers who were then later represented by the ACLU. And I'll get into that in a moment. But what was I able to find about this at the Historical Society? So there is a great exhibit online, co-sponsored by the GLBT Historical Society, that has a whole host of information and great sound bites from the event and reflections from people who were there. What I actually found in the archives was a little bit all over the place, but I think still evocative of the people that were there. One thing that I'm showing here that was pretty interesting was actually the accounting for the Mardi Gras ball and the statement of monies received. So not only does it show who was there, it showed who didn't pay their bill, which was funny. There were also coverage. This was the original advertisement for the event at California Hall. This was coverage on the right from Vector, which was the Society for Individual Rights newsletter that they put out. So it explained, it became a galvanizing moment. Remember January 1, it really codified the gay rights movement in San Francisco. Another really amazing artifact that I found that I haven't actually conferred with a real historian to confirm this, but my take was, this was from the Phyllis Lyon and Del Martin archive. It was actually notes that appeared to be scribbled on pieces of paper, cataloging the events of the evening. So I think what happened, this is just conjecture, but I believe that they jumped into action as attendees, as members of Daughters of Bilitis, their lesbian organization. They jumped in and they took notes, extensive notes on what was said and what happened so that they could actually file a factual account as part of the police report to stand up to the police for the first time. This is my favorite headline from the event, Angry Ministers Rip Police. I just love the idea of clergy and the police fighting with each other. I think there are two historically oppressive organizations and institutions that have always harassed gay people. And the idea of them fighting over this event where it's full of men in drag and queers of all types at the time is really just a fun thought. As I mentioned, the ACLU did step in to defend the attorneys, and they were later acquitted. So it was a major victory for gays over the police. This poster you can see at Market and Fifth Street, which is not far from California Hall in the Tenderloin where the event was held. The next is the 1990 ACT UP protest. So Marke B is actually going to be reflecting on these in a moment. So I'll kind of just quickly give you the picture. The AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, or ACT UP, staged a protest in June of 1990. Actually, it'll be 30 years ago, coming up on the 20th, so in 2 days. It was a rebellion that was necessitated by the inaction of the government and mainstream society to recognize or do anything about the severity of the AIDS pandemic, which hopefully sounds familiar in this day and age. The main grievances cited in 1990 were AIDS profiteering. So experimental new drugs like AZT and D4T were available, but not yet used in combination. In most cases at an extraordinary expense. I kind of see a direct analog between PrEP and this scenario. The next grievance was decriminalization of sex work. So sex workers have long been scapegoated as proliferators of disease. And these protests demanded equal rights and protections for all, including sex workers. They also demanded research into women transition, transmission of HIV. It was not researched at all, and women were dying 4 times faster when they contracted HIV. So Marke B, as I mentioned, will expound on this impact in a moment. One of the exciting parts about where this poster is cited is it's actually right at the intersection that was shut down at Stockton and Ellis. So you can go see the poster there and visualize this piece of history. The last poster that I'll discuss is 1978 Gay Freedom Day, which I'm closing with because I feel like it's just the ultimate example of pride as a protest in so many different ways. Not only were queers protesting Prop 6, which would have barred gay teachers from the classroom, they were also boycotting courses, which employed controversial and exclusionary hiring tactics in which prospective employees were subject to a polygraph test, asked questions about their sexuality, and then not hired if it were apparent that they were queer. Photos from 1978 Gay Freedom Day are full of amazing radical self-expression. 2 of my favorites include this anonymous feminist anarchist and this incredible star queen on the right holding up her trophy from the prior year. Jose was there in his Aida getup. The stud was there on a float full of crepe paper flowers. It was also chock full of firsts. It was the first appearance of Gilbert Baker's iconic rainbow flags, which I'm now developing an art project about reverting to black and white. I mean, I don't think Gilbert Baker, and he's expressed this, could have ever imagined the way that this has taken off as a symbol of pride and been monetized, really, which is unfortunate. It was also the first appearance of the SF Gay Freedom Day twirling marching band and twirling corps. It was the first full-blown marketing campaign, I think. This is just me guessing, but looking through all these photos, you see these balloons in every picture of the parade, of the event. Gay Pride 78 on one side and Club San Francisco Baths on Rich Street on the other side. It was also the 3rd appearance of Dykes and Bikes as the way to open the parade. And it was also the first documented disagreement in the parade within the gay community. The BDSM group Society of Janus, who you see the logo on the right here. I talked to Gail Rubin about this, the famed weather historian, and she mentioned that they went through the proper channels to register as a contingent for the parade, but then they were eventually attempted to forcibly expel them because assimilationist gays didn't want leather freaks marching down Market Street as an expression of queer life. And so it was kind of the tip of the iceberg for this disagreement, which still rages on today. There was also amazing leadership. Harvey Milk, who had been recently elected as supervisor, was there and gave an impassioned speech wearing a pink triangle armband. Del Martin was also there in this great Crawford Barton slide with Harvey in the background. The Gay American Indians contingent was there, co-founded by Barbara Cameron. The Third World Gay Caucus, which was for Black and other POC gays. There was a protest against religion and the continued persecution of gays. And finally, just an impassioned all-around call to save our human rights and to be recognized as people. You can view this poster at Civic Center UN Plaza, which is where the 1978 Gay Freedom Day was hosted and subsequent Pride celebrations since then. So I'm going to turn it over to Marke B for our last reflection before making a couple of connections and closing. Marke is the publisher and arts editor of 48 Hills and the Bay Guardian. As a journalist, he has written about queer issues and nightlife history for 30 years. His book, Into the Streets, A Young Person's Visual History of Protest in the United States, will be published in August 2020 by Lerner Books. He also just had an event for that today as well. So thank you, Marke, for doing double duty and really hitting the ground and working with us here. So I've got the images here. I can do the same thing as I did with Dorian, or I can actually show specific images if you'd like. So just let me know.
Oh, I think you can just scroll through the images and I think they'll be okay.
Okay.
Yeah, good. Hi everybody. Thanks so much for coming. I'm Marke B. Thank you for the great introduction, Win, and I'm going to talk about the week that ACT UP shut SF down. The 6th International Conference on AIDS was scheduled to take place in San Francisco in 1990. And I'm not sure if the organizers thought that was a great idea or some kind of, promoting the gay community and that, but it turned out that that was probably the worst thing that they could do because San Franciscans were fed up with what was going on with AIDS research, with AIDS drug pricing, and with the way the Bush administration was treating queer people at the time. The face of AIDS for the government and a lot of policy at this time, this was after Ryan White, this was after Rock Hudson, was primarily male, primarily white, definitely white male, and sometimes even straight. And, San Francisco, with its many wonderful subcultures and its diverse, at that time, population, was standing up against that. At issue were things that the conference wasn't sufficiently addressing, like the infection rate and treatment of women, people of color, intravenous drug users, sex workers. There were draconian laws against needle exchanges, harm reduction was put on the back burner, and a terrible new law that forbid HIV positive people from entering the country. For some of us that lived through that at that time, it brings back some painful and sad memories, as well as this wonderful memory of this uprising that happened in San Francisco, and for 4 days really flooded the city with activist energy. For the 25th anniversary in 2015, I spoke with journalist Tim Kingston, who was there. And his quote was, "We were fraught, frustrated, enraged, and with very little hope. But we were also determined, and with all of us together, there was a feeling of strength and even festivity." As ACT UP and supporters from other organizations shut down intersection after intersection in San Francisco, were often arrested and treated violently by the police, and really made themselves vulnerable to a lot of the things that could happen to queer people and people of color and women in our carceral system. They came through with like a festive feeling because they were finally being able to take a stand and do something. In one of the pictures previously, you saw Jason Bishop. He was the blonde person who was kind of speaking out with his hand raised. He's kind of a legend that came out of that time. And every time we bring up that picture, we get such a deluge of great memories. There were so many fantastic women activists involved. Scarlett Harlot was a fantastic representing sex workers. She was there. And all of these personalities were not just confined to protesting. As Tim Kingston said, there was also a festive mood. And so I also want to show some slides of the nightlife at the time from a show an exhibit that I curated with Melissa Hawkins at the GLBT History Museum, of shots of the complementary nightlife that was happening here in this shot. Sorry, in that last shot, you could see how ACT UP and harm reduction were involved in the nightlife at the time. Because these two things were so intertwined. You would protest all day and then you go dance all night. Nightclubs a lot of nightclubs were open all night at that time, like the End Up, the Stud, a few others where you could crash or find some place to crash if you needed to, if you were coming in out of town. This was probably the last era that you could move to San Francisco and be an artist. You could be a protester. We always hear about professional protesters. Well, no one was getting paid, but you could survive on it because you could work part-time in a bookstore and live in San Francisco. And you could go out with fabulous drag queens. Here's Michelangelo and Fatima, go-go dancers. It really was a scene. And so what was going on during the Conference on AIDS was protesting in the streets and dancing all night otherwise. So I really appreciate this opportunity to kind of bring those two things together. And I feel in Win's celebrations of these momentous events in our local history, he really is able to represent both sides of that. So thank you, Win.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Marke. Just in the interest of time, I think I'm actually going to skip this section, but I will show one slide. Suffice to say that throughout this process, I found some amazing connections between all of the subjects. These are just a few kind of off the top of my head, whether they ran in the same circle or they patronized the same bar or they died of the same thing or they were involved with the same organizations or they protested at the same time. There were just amazing connections between almost every element and the other. So I think the message I'm trying to say here is that it really is a community, and it's a queer community, and it's one that is recursive and folds in on itself and is circular in so many ways. And we just need to not lose sight of that as we are battling for our civil rights in this next era. So in closing, just some quick tips if you're going to go see the posters in real life. You can scan a QR code in the lower left-hand corner of each poster for a multimedia experience. It'll actually take you to the page on the website that has more information about each person, place, or protest. You can find images in the examples where there are video. You can play videos. There's videos of Teresita you can watch and listen to her sing while you look at the poster. Or you can learn more about any of the topics. I tried to compile some of my research into one really user-friendly resource. Also, you can go to my website, prideisaprotest.com/map, and there's a Google map that you can also send to your phone that has the actual locations of each listed. So if there's one in particular you want to go see, go check it out. I've also been renting the city bike shares on the Lyft app on one end and biking and doing a loop. So that's another great way to do it. Just be sure to bring your helmet. So in closing, I just wanted to close with a quick thought. If Pride is a protest, then what are we protesting for this year, especially since there is no actual formal Pride celebration? And I think the answer is obvious. It's Black Lives Matter. Black trans lives matter. Black queer lives matter. I think this quote from Adrienne Fouzi is something that really resonated with me reading about her experience. So I'll just dive in. It's called "Censorship is not an orphan." Censorship is not an orphan. Its father is power. Its mother is religion. Its siblings are repression, silence, and denial, all existing in a dynamic of dysfunction that recognizes my essential otherness and requires me to smother myself so that I may receive their love and be accepted. So I think really what she's getting at here is you need to embrace people for who they are. I mean, I think we've seen that bubble up almost immediately with the notion of Black trans lives matter. It's not just advocating for one subsection of the community, it's advocating for everyone. And don't expect people to smother themselves so that you may shower love upon them, but accept them for who they are. Where do you start if you're not already an activist? I think most queers are, but a great place to start is to educate yourself. Some resources that I've been looking to recently, a combination of Black-led and white-led organizations, but the Anti-Police Terror Project here in Oakland, Vocal New York is doing great work, intersectional work. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund and Surge Bay Area are all great organizations to find a good starting point. You can also just get out there and protest. I know that places like 48 Hills and Broke-Ass Stewart and Fun Cheap SF are all listing any kinds of protests that you can go to in the next couple weeks. Be smart about it, know your COVID status and get tested regularly if you're gonna be around other people. It's free and widely available at this point. Also wear a mask. how can you participate if you don't want to physically protest? I would say look up those organizations I just listed. If you go to my Instagram, @PrideIsAProtest, I have created a story that has information from each of those, and I'm going to be adding to it as we keep going throughout the summer and the revolution. So I just wanted to close with one soundbite, as I alluded to earlier, of Barbara Cameron from her speech at Gay Freedom Day in 1980. She supposedly, I can't actually confirm this, but I like to think of it as true, stormed the stage, even as an unexpected speaker, to decry the lack of representation that she saw on the stage and talk about it. So Lee, I think I'll try to leave this up, and if you need me to stop share, I can also do that.
I think you might have to take that off for a moment, and I'll load up the sound, and then you can bring it up.
Okay.
All right, we're sharing my sound, so you can bring up your video or your.
It's saying starting screen share will stop the other computer's sound share, so that's okay. I'll just share the last visuals once it's done.
All right, it's weird. It worked in our test.
No worries. That's fine.
All right, here's the audio, folks.
Gay life is not silly games, nor does gay freedom mean being able to go to Amelia's or the Midnight Sun every weekend or night. As some lesbians have found out, going to Amelia's or Pegs can be a brutal experience, thanks to San Francisco's finest, the SFPD. Walking in the Castro has its elements of danger because of punks and thugs looking for a gay woman or man to beat up or harass. I think because we live in what's called the gay mecca of the world, we become spoiled and perhaps lazy in our attitudes about our own oppression and the oppression of minorities. Because our city politicians are not grossly or publicly homophobic, and because we have a gay supervisor, we think we really have it made in this town. But we cannot forget that it was a short 19 months ago that Harvey Milk was murdered, and his murderer got away with nothing short of a hero's medal. So as we celebrate this day, we should temper our celebration with the remembrance of our slain gay people who have been victimized because of their gayness, and in remembrance of the many gay people struggling to come out. And it is Gay Freedom Day celebration. We do have many, many things to celebrate. We should celebrate the richness and diversity of our gay culture, which should be blatantly displayed up here by having speakers who represent those precious diversities. We should celebrate the fact that gayness crosses all racial borders and that third-world gays will working for their people's liberation, work for gay freedom, even though we experience racist and sometimes hostile attitudes from the white gay community. We should celebrate our gay artists, the musicians, poets, writers, photographers, painters, and dancers who bring us our aesthetic dreams. We should celebrate the anonymous gay people who work their ass off for our freedom. Gay people are a many-splendored community, but we must be more sensitively evolved and stronger as a community. We have forged innovative changes and new ways in the realm of human relationships and families. Our diversity is our strength, and our strength is a path to our freedom. Thank you.
That was Barbara Cameron of Gay Native Americans.
Unmute. I think I'm unmuted. Okay. So anyway, I mean, obviously, I think that speech is so relevant today, and it's sad that it's 40 years later and it's the same problem. But I think the takeaway is that our diversity is our strength, and the strength is our path to our freedom. So I just want to leave you with that thought. And with that, that's all I've got for you. So I don't know if we have time for Q&A or if that's just going to be it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Win, and everyone who shared their reflections. This was amazing work. Everyone, I've learned a lot, which is always really exciting. I mean, we have like 5 minutes left in the program if anybody is itching for a question. Otherwise, folks have put their Twitters or their Twitter accounts or their Instagrams on the screen. You can always send more questions to Win about his research and projects at his Instagram at Pride is a Protest up there. And thank you so much, everyone, for participating, and keep fighting and donate to Black trans people.
All right, thank you so much, Lee. And thanks everyone for sticking in for the long haul. And I think we can just leave it there.
Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Thank you
good
so
night.
much. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.